for being here. This is the 8th in a series of webinars organized by a group of Europe Direct Centers coordinated by the University of Siena. Today we delve into the transition from the European communities to the European Union. The European communities, as you know perhaps, were established in the 1950s. And today we will delve into the transition from this first form of European integration to the current European Union. The title, as you can see, is How the European Communities Became a Union. And in order to analyze this transition, we need to start with the foundation of the European community. As a starting point of our analysis, we should look quickly at the origins of the European communities. And to analyze the origins of the European communities, however, we must take into consideration the context. We must frame the birth of the European communities in the context. And the context was characterized by the Cold War. The Cold War lasted from 1946, 1947 until 1989, 1991, when the Berlin Wall collapsed. The communism fall in Central and Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. But as we shall see, the Cold War is crucial to understand the origins and the development of the first European communities. We must say that there is a strict link, a strict connection between this rivalry between the US and the USSR and the birth, the foundation of the European communities. What was the Cold War? Well, the Cold War was the ongoing enmity, rivalry between the Soviet Union and its satellites on the one hand, and the United States of America and its allies on the other hand. The Cold War, as you can see, was waged on political, ideological, economic, cultural, military, social, and propaganda fronts, and as you can see, had only a limited recourse to weapons. Above all, and this is very, very important, the US and the USSR never fought each other directly. But the Cold War, I repeat, characterized the world from the end of the Second World War and the end of the 80s, early 90s. And I repeat, it is worth repeating that this context, the Cold War, this ongoing enmity between the two superpowers, is crucial, is paramount to understand both the origins, the foundation, and the development of the European communities. And because of this, we must stress the Cold War was not just a European issue, it was a global conflict. The planet, all the planet, the world was involved in this war. Here you see a very interesting map, I think, that shows this division, this split between the West, led by the US, and the East, hegemonized by the Soviet Union. In blue and sky blue, you see the countries that belong to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, all that were allied of the United States of America and the Western Bloc. And in red, you see the countries hegemonized by the Soviet Union, the communist side, so to say. And as you can see, almost all countries in the world were involved in this war. And because of this, we cannot understand, we cannot grasp the meaning of the European integration process, and we cannot understand the reasons behind the foundation of the European communities in the 50s, 1950s, without taking into consideration the role played by this rivalry. You have seen in this map that the world was divided into two opposing camps, irreconcilable camps, the US-led camp and the Soviet Union-led camp. Europe too, as you can see, was split into two opposing fields, the Western camp and the Western camp. Europe was divided by the so-called Iron Curtain. You see the black line. Iron Curtain is a definition, an expression coined in 1946 by the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The Iron Curtain, as you can see, was the theoretical division between line that divided Western Europe close to the United States of America and the Eastern Europe, which was submitted, as you know, to the Soviet control. So Europe, the world, was divided into fronts. Europe was split into two opposing camps, and as you can see from this map, however, Germany too was divided into an eastern part and a western part. This division was a consequence of the Second World War, when Germany was split into four occupation zones, as you can see. West Germany was divided among the British occupation zones, the American occupation zone and the French occupation zone.
Scusami Daniele,
sì.
Le slide non vanno avanti.
Ottimo, e quindi come faccio?
Non lo so, c'è Marcello. Non le vediamo andare avanti. E poi non vedo Marcello le mani alzate.
Le mani alzate magari sarà un po' presto.
Sì, sì, però non le vedo, perciò c'è bisogno comunque di fare qualcosa.
Allora, prova a interrompere la condivisione e a ripartire. Adesso?
Ancora non le vedo.
Marcello ci può aiutare? Adesso girano?
Non vedo proprio la presentazione.
C'è qualcun altro qui che può dirmi se vede o non vede la presentazione?
Io non vedo niente, vedo le iniziali DP e basta.
Perfetto.
We ask you to wait a few minutes because we are just waiting to solve the problem with the slides. Just a moment and the lesson will start again.
Non so se Marcello può darci una mano, aiutarci a risolvere il problema.
Dipende da lei, suo PC. O mi manda le slide e le mando io, o non so come aiutarla.
Allora, mi dà il suo indirizzo?
Marcello.denino.
Aspetti un attimo. Marcello punto.
Di Nino.
Di Nino.
Sì, come è scritto sul mio...
Poi?
Chiocciola unich.it.
Ok, le ho inviate, vediamo se riesce lei a girarle. Okay, can you see the slides now?
Sì, Daniele, sì.
Okay, so I will resume quickly what I have already said. That is, it is important to understand the origins and the development of the European communities to frame the European integration process within the Cold War context. The Cold War, può mandare avanti, the Cold War was the ongoing rivalry between the US and the USSR. Let's take a look to the maps that can be important and telling to understand the Cold War. Può mostrare le mappe, la quinta e sesta slide. La quinta e la sesta. Okay, this is the world during the Cold War. The world was a sort of Chinese box, a Wested box. As you can see in blue sky and light sky, you see in blue sky and in the light in the blue sky and the blue, the countries that belonged to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created in 1949. And it was a Western defensive military alliance led by the US. Then you see the countries close to the United States of America and the Western Bloc. And in red, you see the communist camp led by the Soviet Union. And since now, from this map, you can see that Europe was divided into two opposing camps. Europe, with the exception of Korea, was the only place in the world in which the US field and the Eastern Bloc was bordered. And this made Europe one of the most crucial areas during the Cold War. A very important scholar, Italian scholar, Federico Romero, a few years ago published a book on the Cold War, and he titled the book The Cold War, The Last Battle for Europe, to stress, to underline how important our continent was during the Cold War, even if, I repeat, it is worth repeating, that the Cold War was a global conflict. It did not involve only Europe, it involved the planet, the world. However, I told you, Europe was one of the centers of this conflict between the West and the East. And Europe too, at the end of the Second World War, a seguente slide, was divided into two opposing camps. The western part of Europe, può girare la slide, the western part of Europe, può girare la slide, okay, the West Europe and Eastern Europe. I told you that the former British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, in 1946, gave a speech in America, in an American university, and he described the new European situation in the aftermath of the Second World War as characterized by an iron curtain dividing Western Europe from Eastern Europe. Germany too was split into an eastern part and western part. La slide seguente, per favore. And again, this was a consequence of the end of the Second World War and the end of the alliance between the US and the USSR. You know that the US and the USSR fought together against Germany, Italy, and Japan during the Second World War. Germany, defeated at the end of the Second World War, was divided into 4 occupation zones: the British, the American, and the French ones on the western part, in the western part of this country, and the communist sphere of influence. And as you can see, the former German capital too, Berlin, was split into 4 occupation zones. This was Europe at the end of the Second World War, fully immersed in this global conflict, the Cold War. And the Cold War, the bipolar confrontation between the two superpowers, is a crucial key to understand the origins of the European communities at the beginning of the 50s. La slide seguente, per favore. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the United States of America put a lot of pressure on its Western European partners to unify themselves, to unite themselves. The US, Washington, encouraged its Western European partners, allies, to cooperate more closely, including West Germany. And this is very, very important, including West Germany, as West Germany, which was created in 1949, was no longer an enemy. The Western Bloc now had to cope a new threat, and the new threat was the Soviet Union, was the communist camp. So the US encouraged its Western European allies to cooperate more closely, including West Germany, to deal with the new threat, global threat. And the global threat was the Soviet Union, and this pressure was part of the US broader strategy for post-war stability and a containment policy toward communism. Containment was the new American foreign policy, and it was elaborated and promoted since 1947 by the then American President Harry Truman. The European integration process was a chapter, an important chapter of this containment policy. And moreover, the European integration process was a chapter of the building up of a Western bloc to deal, to cope, to face, to counter the Soviet Union and its satellites. So the main goals of the European integration process was to pacify Western Europe. Western Europe needed to overcome its traditional rivalries, first and foremost the enmity, traditional enmity between Germany and France, as the Western Bloc included Germany and France, and they had a new enemy, a new rival, an even more threatening rival, that is the USSR, to increase the economic wellness. Since the beginning, the European integration process had a clear aim, a clear goal, to promote economic growth and prosperity. And finally, and I have highlighted, underlined this goal in red, as in my opinion, and not only my opinion, this is crucial to understand the reasons behind the European integration process. The European communities that it had to include Germany were necessary to solve the German question. And the German question was how to include Germany, West Germany, of course, within the Western Bloc, as Germany was, I repeat, no longer an enemy. The Western Bloc had to cope with a new threat, and the threat was the Soviet Union. Now the time has come to reinstall, to reintroduce Germany within this new emerging bloc. And the European integration process was a tool, an instrument to help Germany to restore its international role and international profile. So because of this American pressure, because of the consequences of the Cold War and the need to unify Western Europe, in 1950, on May 9, 1950, la slide successiva per favore, the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman put forward his paramount declaration. Here you see Robert Schuman, the standing man, and beside him you see another important, let me say, key figure in this context. On May 9, 1950, the then French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman, a Catholic, delivered his very well-known declaration. The Schuman Declaration, all of you know that the Schuman Declaration unleashed the process that led quickly to the foundation of the first European communities, as we shall see. And correctly, properly, this man is seen as one of the key figures in this process. But even more important, in my opinion, is the man sitting in this picture. And this man is Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet was the one who had the idea to unify Europe, to promote the European pacification, to promote the Franco-German reconciliation, to promote political stability, economic growth, and wellness in Europe. Jean Monnet had the idea to set up the first European communities. However, Jean Monnet was not a politician. He was never elected in the French parliament during his life. He was a technocrat. He was a banker. He was a member of the international business community. He was a French, of course. So he was not a politician. He did not have the political power, the sword, so to say, that is the political power to realize, to concretize his idea. He needed the political power, and he started a series of talks and meetings with Robert Schuman to persuade the French foreign minister that the best solution for France, that the best solution for Germany, that the only way to reconcile France and West Germany, to respond to the American pressure and to promote peace, stability, and economic growth in Europe was to set up, to build an unprecedented international organization, that is the European Communities. This was his idea. Robert Schuman accepted these proposals, and on May 9, 1950, Robert Schuman, in the Salon de l'Horloge in Paris, issued his declaration, and through this declaration, he promoted the beginning of the European integration process. La slide seguente. It is rather interesting, I think, to take a look to some sentences, phrases, excerpts from this declaration. As you can see, there are many references to Germany in this declaration. Schuman explained that the coming together of the nation of Europe, it is the European Communities, requires the elimination of the age-old opposition of France and Germany. That is, if we want peace in Europe, if we want to establish a European community, a European partnership among our countries, we need to overcome the Franco-German rivalry. And because of this, as you can see, and this was the Jean Monnet idea, the Jean Monnet thinking, we need to share the Franco-German production of coal and steel, and to place the Franco-German production of coal and steel under a common high authority. And third, and the most important sentence here in this slide, the solidarity in production thus established will make it plain that any war between France and Germany becomes not only unthinkable, but materially impossible. So as you can see, since the beginning, and you know perhaps that the first European community was the European Coal and Steel Community, since the beginning, the main goals of the European integration process was first peace in Western Europe, and second, the idea was we can achieve peace in Europe only through the Franco-German reconciliation. And we can achieve the Franco-German reconciliation if we place under a common high authority, the Franco-German production of coal and steel, as coal and steel were traditionally the main bone of contention between France and Germany. So this was, I repeat, the Jean Monnet idea to spread peace in Europe, to achieve peace in Europe. Robert Schuman accepted these proposals, this idea. He delivered this very, very well-known declaration, an outstanding moment in European history. And from this declaration, and because of this declaration, the European integration process started. La slide seguente. And the first community was established through the Treaty of Paris. The treaty was signed in 1951, and the treaty established the European Coal and Steel Community. The European Coal and Steel Community was a success, and in 1957, the 6 founding member states signed the Treaties of Rome. And let me say that the Treaties of Rome, which established the European Economic Community, and the European Atomic Energy Community, also known as Euratom, the 1957 Treaties of Rome is the genuine, the real beginning of the European integration process. One might argue that the European Economic Community is the forerunner of the current European Union. La slide seguente. As I have already told you, the first European communities were established by the 6 founding member states. Schuman told that the European integration process was an open process, and along with France, West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium joined the French proposal, and they established the European Coal and Steel Community, the European Economic Community, and the European Atomic Energy Community. So at the beginning, only 6 Western European countries joined the European communities. As you can see, the UK, the United Kingdom, was, so to say, absent at the creation. There are domestic and international reasons that explain why the UK did not join the European community. This was called the Little Europe, or Europe at 6. But it was a little Europe, but it was a success story. Among other things, the European community guaranteed an unprecedented era. La slide seguente, per favore. Guaranteed an unprecedented era of economic growth, peace, and stability in Europe. Può girare la slide, per favore? I told you that the European community guaranteed an unprecedented era of economic growth. And this is confirmed by a very well-known and influential book written by Jean Fourastier, a French economist who published a book entitled Les 30 Glorieuses, or the Golden Age. The Golden Age was the period between late 1940s, middle of the 70s, early 70s, 1970s, during which Western Europe experienced economic growth, full employment, and low inflation. During these 30 years, more or less, the EC member countries, the EC member states, experienced the so-called economic miracles. And let me say that the European community, the common market, contributed a lot to this economic growth and the European wellness. So Europe, this little Europe, the Europe at 6, the European communities, can be seen as a success story. And a further evidence, or let me say perhaps the clearest evidence of this success, was the series of enlargements that the European communities experienced from the early 70s to the middle of the 80s. La slide seguente, per favore. Può girare la slide? As you can see, from the early 70s until the middle of the 80s, 1980s, the European communities enlarged its borders. The first enlargement took place in 1973 when UK, Ireland, and Denmark joined the European communities. Indeed, the UK applied to join the European communities in 1961 and 1967, but France rejected its application. However, in 1973, UK joined the European community along with Denmark and Ireland. In 1981, it was the Greece's turn to become a member of the European community, and a few years later, in 1986, Spain and Portugal became EC members. So in 1986, the European community consisted of 12 member states, from 6 to 12 in 35 years. This is, I repeat, the clearest evidence of how important the European community was in terms of economic growth, stability, and wellness. La slide seguente, per favore. The last achievement, crucial, outstanding achievement of the European community before the end of the Cold War was the single market or internal market, which was established between 1987 and 1993. The single market is an area without internal borders, frontiers, in which the free movement of people, services, goods, and capitals is ensured. This is a very important result of the European community. The last important achievement. It entered into force in 1993, but of course, a single market cannot be achieved overnight. A transition period was needed, and the transition started in 1987, when the treaties of Rome were changed, were reformed, and the Single European Act was approved, and the Single European Act, the first reform of the treaties of Rome, entered into force and unleashed the process that ended in 1993 with the entry into force of the single or internal market. However, at the end of the 1980s, a new story began. La slide seguente, per favore. And the new story was marked by the collapse, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War, as we shall see, promoted a deep change, a crucial change in the political and institutional, in the EC political and institutional profile. It triggered a new era, a new phase. So we must delve into this process, the end of the Cold War, to understand the steps taken by the European integration process in the late 80s and then in the early 90s. Steps that led to the transformation of the European community into the European Union, the transition from the EC into the European Union. The Berlin Wall collapsed in November 1989. Needless to say, this is a paramount moment, not only in the European history, but in the world history. The fall of the Berlin Wall meant the end of the Central and Eastern communist European regimes, communist regimes in Central and European, in Central in Europe and Eastern Europe, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall led to the end of the Soviet Union in December 1991. So it is a paramount moment, but let me say that one of the most crucial consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall was the reunification of Germany. La slide seguente, per favore. Of course, as we have seen, the split of Germany, the division of Germany was a consequence of the Second World War. And the division of Germany was crystallized by the Cold War. So when the Cold War ended, the most obvious, trivial consequence was the reunification of Germany. The division of Germany was an unnatural settlement. This is rather obvious. And when the wall came down, the West German leadership immediately started to put pressure on East Germany, and above all started to put pressure on the Western allies to allow the German reunification. The West Germans, as well as the Western Germans, as well as the Eastern Germans, wanted to put an end to this unnatural division. And the then West German Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, a giant from a political point of view. He was the German Chancellor. He is very well known. He was the one who promoted the German reunification. And because of this, he's considered as one of the most influential post-war European politicians. These men, immediately after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, gave a very, very well-known speech at the German Bundestag, the German parliament. And his speech, he put forward 10 points that paved the way to German reunification. The German reunification, you can clearly understand, was seen, I repeat, by the Germans as a natural, obvious consequence of the collapse of the Berlin Wall. But we must add that there were different ideas, different opinions, different vantage points in Europe about this reunification. La slide seguente, per favore. Many European influential policymakers in Europe feared the German reunification. Può girare la slide? To understand these anxieties and fears, we must remember how important, we must stress how important history is and the legacy of history is. Germany has its past, has his history, and you know that the Second World War broke out because of the German responsibility. And the project of the German reunification was bound to raise many anxieties, concerns, and worries in Europe. Here you see the British Prime Minister reaction to the speech given by Helmut Kohl in the German Bundestag at the end of November 1991, the 10 points speech. As you can see, Margaret Thatcher strongly opposed German unification, as he believed that a unified Germany could dominate Europe from an economic point of view. And she tried to stop or to postpone the German reunification, and he tried also to persuade the Soviet leader Gorbachev to oppose the German reunification, arguing that neither Britain or no other European nations actually wanted the German reunification. So this influential leader tried to stop the German, or to postpone the German reunification, as, I repeat, she feared the German economic, and monetary power. Of course, she did not think that a unified Germany could declare war on the rest of Europe or could invade France or invade Britain. But she feared the German economic and monetary power. François Mitterrand too feared the German reunification, and however, he thought that a reunified Germany had to be firmly anchored in a unified Europe. He thought that the only way to handle the German reunification, to tame, to control the emerging German economic and monetary power, was to anchor Germany, to tie Germany within a new European community, and to anchor Germany within a European context. To tame, this was the only way to tame and control this huge and powerful country at the center, at the heart of Europe. Italy too, as you can see, this is a sentence from Giulio Andreotti, an ironic sentence. He gave this ironic phrase, this ironic statement in 1984. I love Germany so much that I would prefer there to be two of them. And this is a sentence that clarifies that Italy too was rather worried for the German reunification. However, as you can see, the one who had the correct, proper, good idea to solve the new German question, the re-emerging German issue, was François Mitterrand. The German unification was an unstoppable process. You could not deny the German people to reunify themselves. This was obvious. And the only way to solve the new German question was to reinforce, to strengthen the European Union, the European communities, to change, to reinforce, to deepen the ties between the European countries. This, it is worth repeating, was the only way to solve the new German question. La slide seguente, per favore. And this was the idea, to change the European communities into the European Union. Mi gira la slide. The German unification took place in October 1990. So it was a very rapid and quick process, as you can see. East Germany ended was absorbed, so to say, by West Germany. A new Germany born was established. It was a member, of course, of the European community, and Germany, along the new Germany, the reunified Germany, along with its EC partners, started the process that in the end led to the Treaty of Maastricht. Giri ancora. This was the new Germany, as you can see on the left. No, la slide precedente un attimo per favore. On the left you see the former West Germany and the former East Germany. On the right you see Germany, a huge country, a very powerful country at the heart of Europe, which was bound, I told you, to raise many concerns in Europe. And the Germans, to calm down the European concerns, to mitigate the European concerns, accepted to change the existing EC treaties and to establish a new organization, the new European Union. And no less important, crucial, is the fact that the German political leadership embodied by the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, accepted to set up the European Monetary Union and a single currency. That is, and let me say that this is a key moment to understand the birth of the European Union. The German political establishment accepted to share the German monetary and economic policy with Europe and to set up the European Monetary Union and a single currency. In other words, to calm down, to mitigate the European concerns, fears and anxiety, Germany accepted to give up the German national currency, the mark, and to share, I repeat, its monetary policy with its European partners. And this was a painful step for many, many Germans, as the Deutschmark, the German national currency, was the symbol of the German economic prosperity. It was the symbol of the German economic miracle. It embodied the German economic strength, power. And in a way, Germany and its European partners established a trade-off. The French and the European partners of Germany accepted the German reunification, and Germany accepted to give up its national monetary policy. This was the trade-off between Germany and the EC partners, and this trade-off paved the way for the negotiations that led to the European Union, that led to the Maastricht Treaty and the European Union. La slide seguente, per favore. Why the Germans accepted this trade-off? Why the Germans accepted to abandon their national currency? Well, I told you that many Europeans fear a reunified Germany. But the German political elite had a tenet, a dogma. The German foreign policy, since the end of the Second World War, in the aftermath of the Second World War, the German foreign policy was grounded on some priorities. And among these priorities, one can see the need to maintain good, friendly, strong links, relations with the European partners and with France. This was a top priority for the German politicians, and this priority oriented, and still today drives the German foreign policy. And this priority was grounded on this dilemma put forward by a very well-known writer, novelist, intellectual, German intellectual, Thomas Mann. This man, Thomas Mann, a few years after the end of the Second World War, gave a speech at the Hamburg University. He addressed to the students of the Hamburg University, that is to the German young generations. And Thomas Mann made it clear that from the Second World War onwards, Germany was in front of an alternative, a German Europe or a European Germany. A German Europe meant the attempt to dominate Europe, the attempt made by Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany during the Second World War that led Germany to the disaster, and Europe and the world to a major unmitigated disaster. The alternative to this aggressive and dangerous attempt was to establish, to contribute to a European Germany. That is to a Germany linked strictly, closely tied to, and in good terms, peaceful terms, with its neighbors, European neighbors. This dilemma, put forward by an intellectual, a novelist, was transformed, so to say, into a priority by the German political elite. Germany, since the end of the Second World War, has oriented its foreign policy towards Europe, and its attempt, its priority was to set up and maintain good terms with its European partners. And this is why, following the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Germany made every effort to reassure and to mitigate, to reassure its partners, European partners, and reiterated its traditional commitment to deepen the European integration process, to reinforce the European integration process. The Germans, the German politicians, the German establishment fully understood that the German commitment to deepen the European integration was the only way to keep and maintain good diplomatic, economic, and political relationship with the European partners. The Franco-German reconciliation was at the origins of the European communities. The German readiness, availability to transform the European community into a European Union and to share its economic and monetary policy with its European partners was the reiteration of the traditional European, German European policy. This is why the European Union, this is why Germany was ready to promote the transition from the European Community to the European Union. La slide seguente. So, reinforcing Europe was the answer. La slide seguente. It was the way to dispel fears and anxiety. And negotiations started. Negotiations followed negotiations to establish the European Union. Negotiations, as you can see, followed two tracks, embodied by two intergovernmental conferences. The intergovernmental conferences had the task of establishing the European Monetary Union and the European Political Union. La slide seguente, per favore. The European Monetary Union led to the creation of the single currency. The second intergovernmental conference, la slide seguente per favore, was again a Franco-German idea. A Franco-German idea. The European Union is not only a matter of money, a matter of single currency. As we shall see, the European Monetary Union deepened the European integration process also from a political point of view. Mitterrand, the French president, and the German chancellor promoted a second intergovernmental conference devoted to the political union, as they wanted to advocate, as they advocated greater democratic legitimacy for the European Union, a more efficient decision-making process, a more coherent socio-economic policy, and above all, they wanted, for the first time in the European integration process history, to give the nascent European Union a common foreign and security policy. So because of these aims, in 1990, June 1990, before the proclamation of the new Germany, as you can see, the European Council opened two IGCs, the first one on EMU, devoted to the birth, to the foundation of the single currency, and the second one on the political union. La slide seguente. These two intergovernmental conferences drafted the Treaty of Maastricht, which established the European Union. The Treaty of Maastricht can be represented as a Greek temple, as you can see, with three pillars. The first one is the European Community. That is the past of the European integration process, the legislation and the policies established during the European community's activities, that is from the 50s until 1993, when the European Union came into force. The second one, the second pillar, was the common foreign and security policy. And the third one is the justice and home affairs. La slide seguente. The Treaty of Maastricht is important because of the single currency, but perhaps you know that the Treaty of Maastricht established the European citizens and it reinforced the European Parliament. The European citizens, as you can see from the following slide, per favore la slide seguente, grants rights, some rights to the European citizenship, to the European citizens. European citizens, as you can see, cannot be discriminated on the basis of their nationality. They can move and reside freely within the European Union. The European citizens means that European citizens can vote for and stand as candidate in European Parliament and municipal elections. And the European citizenship means consular protection. Consular protection in turn means help from the embassy or consulate of any EU country to EU citizens in distress, in troubles, in a country outside the European Union borders where they, the European citizens, have no embassy or consulate of their own country. No less important, as you can see from the following slide, the European, the Maastricht Treaty, la slide seguente per favore, reinforced the European Parliament's powers and competencies through the co-decision procedure, which allows the European Parliament to take part in the European Union decision-making process. And this is important, of course, as you can see, the European Parliament represents the EU citizens willing. We elect our representatives in the European Parliament, and the European Parliament, the members of the European Parliament from Maastricht onwards, because of the Treaty of Maastricht, are involved in the EU decision-making process. So these are, along with the decision, along with the European Monetary Union, the strengthening of the European Parliament powers and competencies, and the European citizenship. Maastricht is important also because it established the very well-known Maastricht criteria. La slide seguente, per favore. Maastricht criteria that the EU countries, la slide seguente, per favore. The EU. Mi gira la slide. Maastricht, the EC members, the EC member states established the Maastricht criteria that the EU countries, member countries, had to meet to join the Eurozone, that is, to become members, to adopt the single currency, the euro. These criteria are not included in the treaty. There is a protocol attached to the treaty, but these criteria, of course, are very, very important, as the EU member states during the 90s and in the following decade had to satisfy these parameters to become members of the Eurozone. And these criteria are very, very well known. They concern inflation, public deficit, and public national budget. And I repeat, they had to be met in order to become members of the Eurozone. So the Treaty of Maastricht established the European Union. That included the Maastricht Treaty included provisions concerning the common foreign and security policy, the European citizenship. The Maastricht Treaty enhanced the EP powers and competencies, and it paved the way to the single currency through these criteria. The treaty was signed in February 1992 by the governments, the representatives of the then EC governments, and then the treaty was sent to the national parliaments for their approval. It was sent to the member states, as the treaty had to be approved by the EC member states, and the unanimity was needed. Each country, every EC member states had to approve this treaty to allow the treaty to come into force. La slide seguente, per favore. And Maastricht, and the transition towards Maastricht is important to understand the European Union history and to understand the current state, the current situation, condition of the European Union. But the European Union, the Treaty of Maastricht and the European Union beginning is important also because Maastricht showed the emergence, the ratification process, showed the emergence of an unprecedented phenomenon. That is Euroscepticism, opposition, hostility towards the European integration process. The ratification process indeed was very, very complicated, very, very complex, and especially in 3 countries, important countries. 2 of them represented important, very, very important EC member states. So the treaty was signed, and now the EC member states had to approve this treaty. And the first problem emerged in Denmark. Può girare la slide. The Danish government submitted the ratification to a popular referendum. The Danish government thought that the citizens had to say yes or no to approve or reject the treaty. And because of this, it called a referendum. The referendum was held on June 2, 1992. And as you can see, a majority of Danish citizens rejected the treaty. This was a problem, not only for Denmark, it was a problem for the European community. As I repeat, unanimity was needed to approve the treaty and to allow the entry into force of the European Union. So the EC member states solved this problem by giving Denmark a series of exceptions, opt-outs, derogation. Può girare la slide, per favore. They met in Edinburgh, Scotland, in a European Council held in Edinburgh. And as you can see, they gave this country, Denmark, a set of exceptions, derogations, in the European Monetary Union and defensive fields. These allowed the Danish government to call a second referendum, and this time the Danish citizens approved the treaty. The Danish referendum was a source of concern in Europe, but the main problem, the most complex case, was France. La slide seguente, per favore. As in France, the French president, François Mitterrand, può girare la slide. Può girare la slide. Called a referendum. In France too, a referendum was held. And in the run-up to the referendum, many surveys, many polls showed that many French citizens were not at ease, did not agree with the treaty, as they thought that Europe was too liberal, that the European Union was too neoliberal, that was putting at risk the French welfare state. It was putting at risk the French wellness and economic prosperity. And as you can see, many French people, many French citizens voted against the treaty. The treaty was approved with a very tiny, small percentage, majority I mean. Only 50.8% of the French voted yes to the treaty. As you can see, especially far right wing and left-wing political parties promoted, supported the opposition, the rejection of the treaty. And I repeat, they saw the treaty as an advancement of neoliberalism. In the end, the treaty was approved, but it was a petit oui. This is the French wording. Petit oui means little yes, a small yes. And this referendum, along with the Danish one, revealed the growing wave, the growing Euroscepticism, a growing wave of Euroscepticism, hostility towards Europe, that in the following years was destined to produce Brexit and to put the very existence of the European Union at risk following Brexit, according to many scholars. Le slide seguenti, per favore. Ok, questa la saltiamo. The United Kingdom too experienced a very complicated ratification process. However, in the end, the EC member states, all the EC member states approved the treaty, and the Maastricht Treaty entered into force on November the 1st, 1993. The European Union started to enter it into force, and the most important achievement of the European Union in its initial phase was the single currency. And I show you the last slide. Può far vedere l'ultima slide per cortesia. The Maastricht Treaty, the entry into force of the Maastricht Treaty triggered the process that led finally to the birth of the Eurozone. Between 1998 and 1999, the Eurozone came into existence, and 11 EU member states met the convergence criteria established in Maastricht, the protocol attached to the Treaty of Maastricht, and the Eurozone came into existence with the launch of the single currency on January the 1st, 1999, in Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. The Treaty of Maastricht, the main goal, needless to say, is that this was the main goal of the Treaty of Maastricht, the single currency. But as we shall see, since the beginning of its very existence, the Treaty of Maastricht had many other impacts and consequences. And it is important to stress that the Treaty of Maastricht is the pillar upon which the European Union developed its following developments and its following advancements. And because of this, I think that this transition from the European communities to the European Union is an outstanding and paramount moment, a very key moment in the history of European integration, and let me say, in the European and world history. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready to listen to your questions, if any. You can raise your hand and pose your questions.
At the moment, there are no questions.
Well, if there are no questions, let me know. I think we can conclude now. Is it okay if we conclude now?
I think it's right. No,
Okay.
just a question.
Just a question. So I'm
Alessandro
listening.
Piaudani.
Please, I'm listening.
Please open your microphone, please.
It was very interesting, and I thank you for this lesson. And you showed before the Greek temple with the 3 pillars, and one of them was the security, I think, of the European Union, and it was completely empty. There were no notes regarding it. Can you say something about it, the future developments eventually forced also by this new situation? Thank you very much.
You mean the European foreign and security policy? You mean
Yes.
the second pillar? Well, the second pillar is one of the most important achievements, theoretically, one of the most, in theory, I mean, one of the most important achievements of the Maastricht Treaty. Why the EU, the EC policymakers decided to share their sovereignty over security and foreign policy? Well, the end of the Cold War entailed more responsibilities for the European Union. The European Union needed to be more active and present in the world stage. And because of this, the EC leaders decided to include this pillar. This pillar, however, since the beginning had a problem, a flaw. In order to implement common actions in the foreign and security policy field, unanimity is needed. A unanimous decision is needed to implement common actions in foreign and security policy. And of course, this is the main problem still today for the European Union common and foreign policy. Especially today, we know that today the European Union is facing very important and dangerous challenges. The European Union is threatened by many international actors, or at least it must deal with unfriendly, so to say, international actors, including the US. We all know that the US under Donald Trump had taken a very peculiar, let me say, just say, a peculiar position towards the European Union. Donald Trump gave some interviews and made many declarations in which he defined the European Union as an enemy. He expressly supported Brexit in the run-up to the 2016 British referendum. So the European Union today would need a more efficient foreign and security policy. But the problem is that the large majority, perhaps all the EU member states, did not want to relinquish, to abandon their sovereignty over their foreign policy. They are not ready, they are not eager to share sovereignty with their neighbors. They think they can handle their national interests through their national foreign policy. I think this is an illusion, as Italy, as well as Germany, France, Spain. You can choose whatever EU member state cannot cope, cannot deal with the huge international actors, such as the US or India or Russia, China, and so on and so on. So the best way, in my opinion, to cope with this, to cope with these threats, or by and large, to be influential in international affairs, is to deepen the cooperation, at least to deepen the cooperation among European states, EU member states.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions?
No more.
Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure. Let me thank also the Europe Direct Center's coordinators, the ladies who had organized this series of webinars, and this one too. And I think we have another meeting. C'è un altro meeting?
Sure, May 14 maggio.
Okay,
May
so
14, this is the last one.
okay, on 14 May, there is there will be another webinar, and so I think it will be another great opportunity for all of you to listen. I don't know I really don't know the name of the speakers, but I'm sure he will be able to give you a very interesting lesson, a very interesting lecture. So I invite you, all of you, to take part in this last webinar. Again, thank you very much to all of you for your participation, and see you and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Grazie a tutti.